to first highlight of the evening, conversations with Chirag in his very, very safe and intimate environment. How lucky are we? So let me formally introduce my friend Chirag. So, okay, do I have an echo going on? Maybe. Okay. So Chirag is a seasoned cybersecurity executive with an extensive experience leading cybersecurity, risk management, and compliance programs in multiple countries across several industries. He's the author of 2 best-selling books, 7 Rules to Become Exceptional at Cybersecurity and 7 Rules to Influence Behavior and Win at Cybersecurity Awareness. Chirag is featured in the prestigious CSO 30 last year, list of the top 30 cybersecurity executives in Australia. He was also recognized as a finalist for the Australian Cybersecurity Professional of the Year Award in 2022 as well as 2020. Chirag is a very, very well-known keynote speaker and is currently a director at ISACA, which is the Information Systems Audit and Control Association. He has led teams and multi-million-dollar cyber transformation initiatives, and he's the host of the podcast Chirag Joshi Show, which I highly, highly recommend. I have a fun fact about Chirag, but I'm not going to spoil. I'll leave it for our quick fire Q&A, which will be next. So welcome, Chirag. Thanks so much for donating your time to the Mindful CIO community. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for the welcome. Really appreciate it.
You're super welcome. So let's do it. Full name, Chirag?
It is Chirag Joshi. No magic there.
Okay, but you have the D, right? Chirag D.
Yeah,
Joshi.
so that's actually that's Deepak. That's my father's name.
Okay, Deepak, lovely. Okay, city, country that you're born.
Mumbai, India.
Fantastic, fascinating city. Favorite drink.
Favorite drink. So non-alcoholic would be a nice long black, which I could go for after a long day. Or if I'm in the exciting beverages range, have a good scotch.
Okay. Favorite song or favorite music style?
That might surprise you, but I really like country music, American country music.
Okay.
Depending on the day, the songs can change, but one of the all-time classics for me is Johnny Cash, Ring of Fire.
Okay, you're already giving away your fun fact. How do you keep fit physically and mentally?
Look, I really enjoyed the grounding exercise. I think mentally for me is a couple of facets. One is spending time with my dog, who absolutely keeps me on my toes, as well as breathing exercises. I think that has always helped me. So I do some of the Wim Hof method exercises, which really helped me, especially during pandemic. Physically, but I think it also contributes mentally, is martial arts. I practice martial arts, which really help, just stay physically fit. But in that 1 hour, when you just focus on your technique, the next punch, you forget about everything else. So it's good meditation as well.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Mindfulness in action, martial arts, indeed. And if you're not working the tech cyberspace, what would you be doing, Chirag?
Yeah, I think I would likely be in journalism. I really enjoy exploring different facets of a story, of asking people, and which is why I think the podcast came about as a result of at least pursuing that to a degree, is just talking to knowledgeable people, covering the stories, trying to add some value to it. So I think I would likely be in journalism if it weren't for cybersecurity.
Okay, you're already doing that on the side. Well done, and doing really well, I should say. So, favorite city?
Denver, Colorado.
Okay, which kind of leads to a fun fact about yourself, Chirag.
Yeah, I think it's all teased up to that. I think the fun fact, which many people wouldn't have recognized, is I really like to, and if I say so myself, I'm good at country dancing, two-stepping and line dancing. So I lived a long time in Oklahoma and Colorado in the US. So I got really good at that. When I moved to Sydney, I don't find it as accessible as I did, but Tamworth's not terribly far. So there's something to it.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I definitely was very surprised when you shared that with me. It was like, whoa, I wouldn't picture you country dancing. Now I do. Okay, so actually let me bring the slides back because you do have slides. So I'm just allowing you to run so multiple screens. So over to you, Chirag. Let me know if you're able to take over.
Yeah, let me just try. I don't think I can take over just yet.
Okay, multiple participants can share simultaneously. Okay.
Or do you want me to just share myself? I can do that too if you want. Just
Yeah.
share my slides. Yeah, I'll just do
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So
might be easier that way. I'm hoping you all can see the slide.
let me stop sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Should be able, yes, now it's with you.
Okay,
Perfect,
awesome.
perfect.
So look, firstly, really appreciate again, I think everyone being here. Cybersecurity is an important topic, especially the times we live in. And the topic today is be the thermostat, not a thermometer. And I'll talk about the idea behind the topic. But I do want to start by saying that what I'm going to share is based on my practical work experience, what I have seen work, what's the good things, the bad things, the lessons I have learned. So I'm not saying this is the only way, but this is what I have kind of figured out in my way, what has helped me. So hopefully I can share something that helps you. So before we get into cybersecurity, I mean, I don't even want to get into cybersecurity just yet. I do want to start by just thinking and reflecting on the world we live in today. And this is an amazing infographic that Domo publishes every year. And it's always fascinating to me is what happens every minute, every day on the internet. So every minute, every day, Google users are conducting 5.9 million searches. Every minute, every day, and this is perhaps new, crypto buyers are purchasing $19 million worth in cryptocurrency. Every minute, every day, people are spending 105,000 hours in Zoom meetings. And every minute, every day, I just look at my screen and I see Tinder users swipe 1.1 million times. So safe to say, how we work, how we invest, how we even date has changed. And I think a big part of it is technology. And technology has contributed to us living in a very different world that we live in. And I think that's a great world. At the same time, the value of cybersecurity has been to enable trust in this technology. So people can actually trust these things to work and hence place their faith. And when they actually engage in these activities, it is helpful. So which is why I remind myself when people start talking about cybersecurity, the first thing is we exist to enable a greater cause. We enable human progress in some shape and form by enabling trust in technology. So I think that's the context behind everything that I'll talk about today, and that's the reflection. And I know we'll have breakout rooms, but I know some folks mentioned that they might have leave early. So at any point, if you have questions, if you want to discuss, happy to take them. This is not just me talking; it's a conversation. Okay, so I thought the way I would structure this, because this is about mindfulness and this is about us thinking and digging deeper. I didn't want to just talk cybersecurity nonstop for 30 minutes, but I did want to add some context to cybersecurity because I think that's where I can come in and help share some insights. So this slide just talks about what happens in the cybersecurity world typically. And it's actually not just cybersecurity world now. I think it's dominating news headlines, it's dominating political discourse, it's dominating conversations from boardrooms to living rooms is cybersecurity. And that is sadly as a result of the breaches that we've seen very prominently here in Australia. Think about Optus, Medibank, Latitude Next. So that's just been nonstop. But it's also about not just breaches. It's also about the expectations that we have from technology that have dramatically changed, especially on the back of the pandemic, because organizations went into heavy digitization mode to reach out to the customers, to continue their businesses. So the expectations changed. Expectations of consumers changed because they were now everybody could figure out what a QR code was and could scan it. Something that people learn so quickly, which is in itself quite amazing. So how we interacted, how we did businesses, that changed. So hence cybersecurity got more prominent, but also had to move at a speed which it wasn't used to. And I think that's another thing which contributed to the chaos. Then I look at the regulatory environments. So obviously, in light of all the things that I mentioned, you saw regulators across many different industries, financial services, critical infrastructure, come out and actually talk very clearly about the expectations that they have from the companies, from the organizations, but also the expectations that consumers had that data would be safe. I mean, all of that became a lot more prominent. Privacy Act amendments came into play. The fines increased. So again, adding one more layer to an already very complex space. So I think that's been an ongoing thing, and I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. We look at the geopolitical landscape, and it's fascinating. I can share that some of the links with the community later. But when you see now even warfare breaking out, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, you see cybersecurity feature prominently and cyber attacks feature prominently there. But it's not just that. It's also nation states being involved in espionage, which has happened for a long time. So the geopolitical landscape does contribute heavily, and it is as our society becomes more digital, so will the cyber threat. So it's just a consequence of that, and not necessarily just because it's something new. I think it's just how we are moving. The online behaviors are reflecting offline behaviors. So all of that is putting a strain on our cybersecurity professionals and technology professionals and executives. I think it's putting stress on people generally. But I have this Area 51 here, and by the way, this is what you'll see in my slides. I hate having text wordy slides because people can read off the slides themselves. They don't need me to read off stuff. So I like having pictures which allows a conversation as an image perspective. But I have this, and Area 51 is typically associated with mysteries, with danger, with intrigue. But it's also kind of a sad statistic when it comes to cybersecurity, because studies are telling us that over half of professionals in cybersecurity and some form of medication to cope with the stress. And I think that is a staggering number. So, which is why the mindfulness aspect of it and other aspect of it that we'll talk about today are really important. And which is why the topic today is be the thermostat, not a thermometer. Thermometer is subject to the whims and fancies and external factors and can change its state all the time, whereas a thermostat sets the temperature, it sets the tone, and it is proactive as opposed to reactive. So that's the idea: is we, as much as possible, let's try to set the tone as opposed to always being deviated by factors and subject to all these forces, because we will be subject to them. It's just how we can put ourselves on the front foot. All right, not an image everybody wants to see on a nice evening, at least here in Australia, or early morning, by the way, where you are, Sahil. It's a face of a scary clown, or just scary in general. Now, typically, if I was doing it in person, I would pause and ask, does anybody like to engage with this individual? And there's maybe someone brave, but typically the answer is no, don't engage with this. Some people have told me, no, take the slide off. I can't see this. But the reason to put this forward is this is the face of cybersecurity, sadly. This is the face that organizations think about, that people who are not cybersecurity professionals look at. And this is the face that they see. It's scary. These people always show up telling us, about breaches and scary things and what we should do and what we must do. It's always that negative conversation. People don't like to engage with negativity. If you think about cybersecurity today, it is fundamentally a business problem. As I mentioned, it's dominating boardroom conversations. Regulators, governments, businesses need to survive and thrive in the digital world. So if we make this to be something scary that people don't want to engage with, you're never going to get that buy-in. Because cybersecurity, at the heart of it, is a human thing. It's about humans, it's for humans. So when you come across as this, this mysterious hoodie-wearing function that is not practical, is not sharing something that is aspirational, it's hard to get engagement. And you can only get away without engagement for so long, scaring people. So we need to change this face. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing that I'll talk about is this slide, because it's something which I really, really like. So at this point, it's important to get some context. Despite all the breaches and everything else we talk about in the cybersecurity world, the reality is, if you look at most credible reports, over 80% of cybersecurity incidents and breaches happen because of the human factor. It's people making mistakes, people being curious, people being sometimes helpful, people just forgetting, just things that make people, or being greedy sometimes, right? and falling for scams. So I think it's the vulnerability, the human aspect of cybersecurity that is so important. But it's also people, humans managing cyber controls and humans using technology. So it's fundamentally a human problem. It's not a technology problem. And which is where if 80% of cyber incidents happen because of the human factor, we need to think about how human beings actually learn, how human beings absorb information. And this is an awesome, graph that I like, but also it's a great TED talk. This is taken from there by Dr. Tali Sharrett, who has an amazing few books as well that you can check out. But really, her research in this space gave us a very good insight into, the ability to learn from good news versus ability to learn from bad news. So bad news like scaring people, warnings, or good news like aspirations, something positive, healthy peer pressure even. So you see, the ability to learn from good news stays consistently better than ability to learn from bad news throughout the human lifespan. But more noticeably, the ability to learn from bad news drops quite dramatically after midlife. And why is this important? I think this is important because if you look at research and look at statistics published, you will see that people who fall for cyber scams and crimes and lose the most amount of money are typically people in this age demographic of 50 and above. It don't make sense though, because these people typically have more disposable income, did not necessarily always grow up with technology, have life circumstances that make them vulnerable sometimes, loss of a partner, divorces, illness, whatever it might be. But by us communicating with fear and leading with fear, we are communicating in the least effective way for people who need it the most. And I think that's the problem I have with how we talk about cybersecurity and how we think about cybersecurity. So with that, I think when we talk about the positive things, let's think about what would actually work. Humor always works. Getting people aligned to a mission, getting people aligned to a business of why a business exists, why an organization exists, always is a good driver. And which is why I didn't start my presentation today talking about cyber breaches. They have a role to play, don't get me wrong. Like, you have to talk about things that happen. You have to raise the importance of those. But that's not the only way, which is why I didn't start with that. I started with the world we live in, the technology, and what has allowed us to do, and even continue, keeping our sanity and working through the pandemic that we faced. All right, something else that works is this. And I'm so glad to see Newcastle Transport doing this, but there are also other areas which have started to do this, which is a behavioral change. Instead of telling and just putting this that you'll be fined if you don't pay your fare, 9 out of 10 customers pay their fare. So if you're not actually doing that, you're one of the few who's doing it. That's a good way to get people involved. It's something that, as much as we human beings think about it, we do care what other people think of us. I think it is an integral part of our evolution, is the social behavior nature of it. So by gently pointing out the non-compliant behavior, you start to change the dial on the conversation. Now, how can this actually work in cybersecurity context? Well, what I call as competitive compliance actually works quite well. Is when you show leaderboards, and look, it's a cultural thing, right? Your organization needs to have the culture to support it. Not every organization does, and I respect that. But the organization that actually have an open culture, they're okay to share the good things and not so good things. And at that point, if there are leaderboards that show, well, when it comes to one of the things in cybersecurity, we talk about a lot of patching systems, because as much as all the other things are exciting, the reality is if you patch your systems properly, you solve a lot of your problems. The basics matter. So instead of just showing people random statistics, actually putting in the context of, here are all the departments, here is how some of them are compared against others in terms of their good hygiene practices. I think that sometimes drives behavior. And if you do it in a good way, in a productive way, there's a lot to be gleaned from that. Or one more thing that we see a lot these days in response to phishing, which is a common social engineering attack that we sadly continue to have in cybersecurity, which is also the first step into a lot of these more sophisticated attacks. When you run these phishing exercises in your organizations, then we track what is called as a click rate or a reporting rate, which I like more, is people who are actually reporting phishes as opposed to just tracking who clicked or did not click, because that's not very helpful to me. Actually comparing, who is reporting the most, which agency or which department or which division is reporting the most. I think creating that healthy peer pressure has changed behavior. And I've seen that in my own professional life, where I presented to executives, I presented to leaderboard, and then they see themselves towards the bottom, and they're like, actually, no, I want us to move not any lower than top 5. What do I need to do? I think that drives some engagement. So it will drive some conversation. So it's not just the fear factor, it's also the other factors. But like I said, there is humor, there is emotions, there is so much more. Because one more thing about cybersecurity, it's not just about corporate systems and corporate data and machines. It's regardless of who you are in your professional roles, all of us are chief information security officers of our own homes. The safety and well-being of our kids and families online rely on us to be smart about these things. So I think that's what I say. It's very personal. It's not just about corporate information or corporate data, because sometimes that can be an abstract concept. It's real human beings who get impacted when we're not doing the right thing. So I think that's a positive message. It's not scaring people. It's just connecting those emotions, because emotions matter. All right. So in terms of a story, I think what we can also do to get on the front foot, and which I think if you are not a cybersecurity executive, a technology executive, or somebody, a business executive, I think this is a conversation you can have with your cybersecurity teams. And I think it's a both way, which is why I wrote my second book, which was all around bridging that gap between business and cyber, because that is an important gap that needs to be bridged. So a story in cybersecurity really comes down to, very simply, do we know what threats and risks matter to us, and what are we doing about those threats and risks? And it's not about cyber threats or cyber risks necessarily. It starts with the business that we are in. So if for an e-commerce organization that is selling, a lot of things online, clearly being an e-commerce company, for them, availability of their systems are really important. And so is security. So availability, confidentiality really matter. The web-facing attacks are a big problem for them. However, if you are a company that does not necessarily have a massive online presence, but rely largely on backdoor operations, but you have a lot of medical records in your database because you're providing patient care in some capacity, well, the integrity of those records are really important. So because if those are tweaked, well, that's a problem, right? You're relying on them to serve people. So not every industry has the same threats that is relevant to them. Threats can differ. Not every organization is subject to nation state doing espionage. Some are. Not every organization has operational technology concerns or physical systems concerns, but some do. So I think it's really important to kind of think about what the business does and then contextualize the threats. At the heart of it, there are only 4 or 5 things in cybersecurity, right? As much as it gets talked about. One is somebody external who maliciously attacks you and steals your information or money. When you have an external malicious attacker takes your system offline and holds you to ransom, the ransomware things we start seeing these days. The other one could be a malicious insider who decides to tamper with your systems and commit fraud, or a malicious insider who takes your systems offline, or in some cases an accidental person who just makes a mistake and sends a customer file full of customer records to the wrong email address. So these are the 5 things that typically go wrong. And yeah, we can talk about supply chain, but that's like an insider in a way, right? So with these 5 things, it's quite simple, but what matters to you will depend on the business it is. So always talk to cybersecurity teams and executives, is challenge yourself to figure out what really matters. Not everything matters to everyone at the same level. After we have figured that out, I think then the conversation moves to a risk conversation, because cybersecurity, at the heart of it, is a risk management exercise. It's not right or wrong. It's what risk you can accept as a business. And I think that is what I always train cybersecurity professionals to think about. Is talk in the language of risk, talk in the language of the impact that financially organizations do, because business executives understand finances, they understand risk. They don't necessarily always want to talk the language of, here are the number of vulnerable systems and here are a number of the defects we found, or, here's your click rate, without context. I think context is everything. So I think cybersecurity teams need to provide that to get on the front foot, because there's one thing to, yes, there is burnout in this space. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are frustrations, but not all of them are out of our control. And mindfulness, besides other thing, is also being mindful about what our message is and what our state is and what we are trying to communicate to what end, being there as opposed to getting distracted. I think you can only be on track if you're communicating with your business in a language that they understand, which is risk, financials, and quantification. So the other thing which I'll say is success measurements is very important. Now, businesses are investing in cybersecurity. Thankfully, that's not, we're not still talking about cybersecurity is important. I think that is now, thankfully, in a position people do understand it and there is interest. Now what people need to, and especially as we get into a climate of economic pressure, we'll start to see this more and more, is what are we getting for the money we're spending? Right? I mean, it's a natural question to ask, and you can't always get away by saying we're going to be secure and all of that. Risk conversations will help you, but you also need to talk about the success that you have. And what has worked for me, and what I think is a good story to get back control, is you paint a maturity journey of assess where you are on your maturity journey today. There are good frameworks out there in cybersecurity, NIST cybersecurity framework, ISO 27001. I won't call all of them here, there are plenty of them available. And there are maturity assessment models like capability maturity model. You just plot yourself wherever you are on that journey today by doing an assessment, and then ask your business where do you want to be and translate to them the risk that you buy down by moving on a maturity journey. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being very mature, essentially very ad hoc, to 5 being highly optimized, highly automated, and very, very meaningful in its implementation. Where are you on the journey? But you don't have to be at a 5 in a target state, but you have to define where you have to be, because your risks will dictate where you need to focus on. Perhaps your focus is on the internet-facing assets because your brand is an important internet-facing asset to you. Perhaps your focus is on business-to-business relationships. That's only for you to decide, and the security controls need to marry up that story. The other recommendation I'll provide is have benchmarking, because typically boards, executives do want to understand how are we doing compared to our competition or compared to generally the industry in that space. So I think having that benchmarking is a good position to take. Is, well, we are investing this much, our control maturity currently is at 2.5, we want to move to 4.2, for argument's sake, but the industry is at 3.8 overall. Well, at least you can now start having some context on it, and there is good benchmarking available, but if you understand your business, you can actually benchmark effectively. That's an important story. The other thing about measuring your success is coming down to smart metrics, and always talk about smart metrics being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. It's an old goal-setting technique from way back in the 80s, I reckon, but it works in cybersecurity. So I mentioned phishing earlier, and I talked about phishing training. It's not the only thing you want to talk about, but let's pick that example up. So after 3 months of training your organization on reporting suspicious emails, the rate of reporting went up by 10%, right? That's a specific metric, a smart metric that you can take, because it's focused on a behavior, which is reporting suspicious emails. It's measurable, it's 10%. It's achievable because there is a way to gather that information, right? You can do it through help desk tickets, through your reporting channels. And I think it's the other thing which I'll say is relevant. I think it's really relevant because it's tied to a risk that is important to you, and it's time bound. It's 3 months or 6 months. It's not in perpetuity. So if you don't see that change in that time, you can change your approach to cybersecurity. And I mentioned phishing. You can also think about training your developers. If you are really focused on web-facing asset or internet-facing assets and you develop a lot of code in-house, you can take a similar approach. After 6 months of training your developers on OWASP top 10 or secure coding practices, the amount of defects found later in productions will reduce by 20%. Pick your metric, pick your number. But I think this is a good way to demonstrate success of your programs because it's tied to a risk and not just random numbers that business executives can just not really understand the language you're speaking. Okay, now moving to the aspects of cybersecurity that connect to some of the purpose of this group today. To me, this is a picture where emotional intelligence is such a powerful thing. And Natalie was kind enough to share an abstract, or not an abstract, but rather an extract from my book on emotional intelligence. But emotional intelligence is a big part of it. Is a lot of people want to do the right thing in cybersecurity. I don't think it's like people don't want to do things. It's the ability to put yourself in those shoes and understand why they struggle to do the right behaviors. But it's also the ability to stop and empathize with the situation of the other person. Because far too often I've seen conflicts in organizations where you have technology teams and cyber teams butting heads. Because cyber teams are telling them to, okay, you got to fix your systems, your outdated patches, or the controls are not being deployed fast enough. But if you look at the other side, there's some genuine reasons why they may not be able to do certain things. Could be that they just, the business is putting pressure on them for availability reasons, and they're not able to communicate that, or they don't have the right budgets to fix that. But that, I'm not saying those are acceptable reasons or unacceptable reasons. I'm just saying you need to be able to empathize, and then that'll help you get to resolution better. So that's a key part of our conversation. But also I say to that is, I talked about earlier the not relying on the fear factor. But when you think about people and educating them and training them on cybersecurity, people could be trained, but they'll still end up making mistakes, or they'll still end up bypassing processes because you made it so cumbersome that they just can't follow it. So I think that human-centric design is such an important part of it. Is putting yourself in that journey, that goes a long way. I think one of the examples that I really liked is, the reason why Uber really worked, and at least I think personally it resonates with me, is if I call an Uber on the Uber app, I know where it is, right? Even if it says 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away, I have some sense of control. But at least I feel like, at least I know. But back in the old days, you just never knew if the cab's going to show up. Where is it? It's been 10 minutes. Are they going to come or not? I'm going to get late. So I think having that sense of control really helped. And I think we human beings like having the sense of control, which is why when we fly, people have fear. But I think if you look about, the maps that now we start to see, and the navigators that tell us our flight path and where we are and the altitude we are flying, that has a positive impact on people because they feel a sense of control. At least they know where they're going, although they can't do anything about it. But the sense of control does help. I think that's the key thing is in cybersecurity, that's something that is missing, is we haven't given our users a self-control, and we just expect people to do things without understanding that. So I think we just need to reflect on it. Other thing I like about this picture is that let's just be as joyful as this dog is here. I think that energy aspect of cybersecurity is so important. I think the joy that comes with us helping people, or just being cheerful and just trying to actually help businesses and help organizations to do the best they can with your cyber skills. I think that is a face we want. We want the face of energy. We want the face of happiness. But it's not just cybersecurity, it's an internal state too. And I mentioned about the Wim Hof method, and I mentioned about, martial arts and other things. For me personally, managing my state is such an important part of my life, because how the energy that we have dictates how we're going to interact with other people. And, I mentioned about engagement being such an important part of cybersecurity. If you're not engaging with people in an energetic manner, I'm not saying fake it all the time. I'm saying control your own state. Don't let external factors take over all the time. And I think that grounding exercise that we did at the beginning, I myself know these things, but even this evening, I felt a bit tired, and I felt like, man, I'm really exhausted because I had a long day at a conference. But that grounding exercise, just a time to reflect, is actually, no, I need to control my state. Went a long way, and I haven't really sipped on the tea later. So I think that goes to show that these things work, and all it takes is a few seconds. So I think the state is really important bit. So I hope that you're doing what works for you. Not everybody needs to wake up at 5 a.m. Not everybody needs cold showers. Not everybody needs martial arts. Not everybody needs meditation. But if that works for you, I think I encourage you to do that. So that energy aspect of it is big. And the last thing, and after this I'll stop talking and we can have a different conversation, is we need to collectively work. And we need a lot of, which is why these communities, the mindful community, is such an important aspect. The CIO community, the CISO groups that we have, the work that ISACA does is, I think having that network of people who you can talk to, who you can share, who you can rely on is really important, especially with the stressors that we face. At the same time, it's not just external groups. I think it's even within the organizations. From a cyber perspective, I always tell cyber people, go out and make friends in the business. Don't spend all your time talking to technology people, because that's not where you're going to get the support. You get from other people. You get from other functions like audit functions, legal functions, marketing functions. They all play a role in cybersecurity today. It's not just a tech function. So have those alliances, because that'll help you. I think we're stronger together. And also a big part of being on the front foot is getting your executives and a tone at the top. And you can get a tone at the top in a few ways. It's not just about executives saying cybersecurity is important, but it's actually demonstrating that. And you can put them in situations where they are aware of the roles and responsibilities that they would face. So what has worked for me is doing tabletop exercises with them, where we simulate a cyber incident, and it's not a technical incident at that point. The technical teams could be doing it separately. It's actually an incident where require businesses and executives to make decisions, and the implication of the decisions are very clear. And that puts them in a situation where there's not a cyber team or an IT team to figure that out. I think they need to be at the table and make those decisions, especially in ransomware type attacks. A decision to pay the ransom or not pay ransom, a decision to stop operations or not stop operations. I think these are very important decisions. And so I think it's an important thing that we can reflect on is putting gamification at the heart of training even executives. And I think when you gamify things, you actually make it interesting, and it's not just a boring, policy that people have to read to. Because let's be honest, most cybersecurity training is really, really boring. And for a lot of people, is a click exercise. Yeah, let's get to the end of it. When you start your job, you do a bunch of training. Cybersecurity is just one of them. So I want to change that. I think what we want to do is actually have that humor, that role-based training, giving that if what matters for your role, if you're trained on that, it really resonates with you. You will remember it. We talk about password managers and not sharing the same passwords instead of just me talking about it. The next time somebody goes to change their password, have a little nudge saying, hey, have you thought about using a password manager? Next time you won't have to forget passwords. You can manage them securely. So I think there are ways you can use role-based training and just-in-time training. So with that, I hope I've given you, at least one actionable thing, but keen to get your thoughts and questions so we can continue this conversation. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Thanks so much, Chirag. And I was listening to you, I was thinking, no wonder. Now I've listened to your podcast, but now just listening to you now, no wonder why you were such an sought after speaker. Your ability to reframe, even the way you started talking about trust, and elevated the conversation of cybersecurity to, what's the value and what's the purpose there. And just the way you reframe the conversation is really refreshing, I should say. So thank you. And I love so many points you mentioned about being proactive, which is really the theme, the topic of the talk today, being a thermostat, not a thermometer. So doing what's within your control to make a positive impact, avoiding being the scary clown, and having a positive attitude. So people are not scared when they see a cybersecurity professional. The importance of the human factor, that often, many of the challenges we face are related to the human factor. So true. And the element of trust. I really love that.